Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I don't have my mic plugged in. That was an accident, totally on my part. Forgot that I had moved my computer. Let's see if we can actually pick up the actual mic instead of my computer. So hang on 2 seconds while I do a little tech here. Let's see. We're going to go input audio codec. There we go. All right, folks, we're here. How are you doing? Good evening. Hey, Leslie, how you doing? Susie Q, good to see you. JJ, glad that you're here. Let's see. And that's what we got so far. So let's roll here. And I just got my kids put to bed, and hopefully they stay there. My wife is gone for a little bit at a big Cub Scout meeting. And so it's just me and the kids here. Hopefully they will stay in bed. Iowa X, how you doing? Good to see you. Glad to have you here. And tonight we're going to finish up the rollicking adventures of Tam O'Hare. And I hope that you've enjoyed this. If you've been here listening to this, rabbits. Where were there rabbits in the Bible? I don't know. On Noah's Ark, maybe. But they didn't call him out. And there's a lot about that story, too, that we'll probably cover in the future. Holly, how you doing? Good to see you. Nice to have you here. So those of you who've been keeping up with Tam O'Hare, we've only got a couple of chapters left, short chapters. One's longer, a couple of short ones. And we'll wrap up Tam O'Hare this evening. And I want to call your attention to a couple of things. First, in 2 hours at 11 o'clock Central, midnight Eastern, 9 p.m. Pacific time, Rocky and I will be going live with the Situation Room. And as usual, it will probably be a fun foray into something or another. A little bit of this, a little bit of that, as they say. So be there for that tonight in 2 hours. Also, I want to bring your attention to my Etsy page, Son of a Patriot. Been putting up some new shirts over there. If you are somebody who loves your country, you might be interested in some of the things that I put up over there. I try not to get too political with them, but I like to stay patriotic. Some might say the two are inseparable. But I was patriotic long before I became political. And you might be the same way. So go over and check out some of the new garments we've got up there. A new one this morning. America, love it or leave it. That was, by the way, a phrase that we used way back when I was a kid in the 60s and the 70s when I was a teenager. That is not the kind of statement that they attribute racism and things like that to today. That started out very differently. Before, everybody was calling a racist simply on the basis of what they did or did not believe. So, and I do encourage you to really study what racism is, who is actually using it, who is actually guilty of it. So those are big differences. They've redefined so many things nowadays that they mean something completely different than what they used to mean. So it's like when, I'm going to use an example that might piss some people off. So don't get too worked up by this. It's like when I was a kid, asking a woman out for a date was not sexual harassment. Asking her twice was not sexual harassment. Being persistent and saying, I want to win this person over, was not harassment. Now, you can't look at a woman funny if you're a guy, or the other way around less frequently, without it being sexual harassment. Everything has been redefined for the current age, the current political correctness of the day. So I've got some shirts up there. So let's see, I guess it's racist and sexist for a black woman to be a general in the USMC this day. Nowadays. Yeah, I posted an article about that. Trump's candidate for general, that he's going to promote to general, a black woman in the United States Marine Corps. Semper Fi. And now you got people saying, well, it's token, somebody told me today. It's not token. It's not token to appoint somebody. See, this is what happens. You're accused of racism for overlooking them. Then you're accused of racism and tokenism if you actually appoint them. So that's all over the board. We all know how that goes. So, hey, Jeannie, good to see you. You're not too late. We really just got rolling. And I don't like to, as you know, I don't like to roll into the story right away. Give some people a chance to get here. I was up 10 minutes ago singing to my kids for bedtime. And I finally just told them, I said, everybody, stay in bed. It's nighttime. And Mom's away at a big scout meeting this evening. She won't be home till late. And so I'm here with the kids. And so the mandate has been put down. Stay in bed. You can watch this movie until I'm done with my show. And other than that, I'm sorry I did not turn off my phone. That's just my wife saying she's almost done at her meeting. So here we are. So I got to sing to them a little bit tonight. It was cute. My boy, he likes to go to his own room and watch something. He didn't come in to listen to the songs. My little girls sat like this on their bellies with their feet up behind them, and they were listening, so they enjoyed it anyway. And my son does too, unless it conflicts with his video game or his movie. And we try to restrain this. If you're a parent, you know what I mean. My older children, we didn't have that problem with movies and video games. We had VHS tapes, and we didn't have video games around the house, and we didn't have internet when my daughters, who are now 27, were little. And so not so much problem with that stuff with them. So let's see. Who else? Leslie, I saw you. I think I saw everybody here. Oh, Becky, good to see you. Nice to have you here. And glad you could make it in. And I hope I haven't missed anybody yet so far. So there we go. Let me just see if anybody's got anything cool to say before we get rolling. Everybody's just saying hello. Good to have you. Yep, Leslie, you're right. Trump is damned if he does, damned if he doesn't. He does when he knows right. He knows his right, and that's right. What I like about him, he doesn't care what people say. He cares enough to comment on it because he's got, like me, he's got a little fighting streak in him. I don't care if anybody wants to call me a Nazi, but I might call him out and tell him, why don't you provide me some facts and evidence that delineate the points of my Nazism. I said, I'll take the first one. A Nazi was a National German Socialist Party member. And of course, everybody's changing the definitions again. Well, Nazi means something totally different now. And I said, yeah, it means if you are Trump or a supporter of Trump. How about give me some more details than that? So there you go. Audrey, good to see you. I heard that too. I'm wondering what Rocky's got up his sleeve for tonight. Hey, Cannoli, she says, I heard you need Jesus. LOL. So we'll see where Cannoli wants to go, or where Stucci, the meatball, wants to go with that one. That's in a little less than 2 hours, folks. The photo is great. Yeah, that was taken during our show with Nancy Planetta last week. If you remember when Nancy was on, we were talking about earthquakes. Oh, cover Audrey's ears. We were talking about earthquakes and volcanoes. And she snapped that picture of me during the break because we were joking around about hats and stuff like that. So let's see. Audrey's still at work. Sorry for you, Audrey. Sorry you have to work so late. It's 7 o'clock out there, even on the West Coast. What are you doing at work at 7 o'clock? So also go to streamingtalkradio.com. Scroll down the page, click on the Son of a Patriot banner. It's big, can't miss it. That'll take you to some of our shirts. Go and get them. That's really one of the ways I have to try to make this show give a little bit of a return. For all the time that I put in and Rocky puts in, it's nice to see a little something come back every now and then. So if you want to help support this show and my research, stuff I do, my writing, go ahead and go take a look at some of those shirts, or just send me cash, whichever works for you. I don't want to be a televangelist, so I won't ask for money. Let's see, where'd I go? I just changed my screen. Let's see, what else did I want to tell you about? We got tonight's Situation Room in. We've got the Etsy page, Son of a Patriot. Oh, and I wanted to give you a link for Tam O'Hare. If you want to go pick up the book, and I didn't promote this much at the beginning of the reading of this, and we've only had, this is only the 5th reading that we're doing for Tam. So it's only a 32,000 word book. So it's relatively short. It's about half the length of most of my books, which were 65 to 70,000 words. The other books we've read on the Nephilim and the Reptilians, Exodus was 85. And so this is about a 32 page book. Here, our word book, I'm sorry. There's the link. If you want to go pick up the color edition of Tam O'Hare, go to that link and find it and secure it for yourself. And if you want it signed, you can send it to me. I'll sign it. I don't have any of those in stock because those are what they call a print on demand. That was my own publishing effort, and that's the way I put these things together. So there you go. And you can go to, that's my email, scottallenroberts@gmail.com. Get a hold of me. And also, one last thing, you can go to my website, which is scottallenroberts.com. By the way, I'm just going to put this particular link in there. You know, we did the tarot readings last Friday. We got about a dozen of them in 2 hours. So if you would like to get a full reading, I want you to know that I do that kind of work. And I have been doing it for over 30 years, closer to 35 years. And so if you'd like to go sign up for a reading, go to this link. That's over on my website, scottallenroberts.com/tarot.html. And you'll just see the PayPal links there. You go ahead and secure yourself a reading, and then we'll get in touch and we'll line it up for you. So we're going to do tarot again this Friday, by the way. So Fridays, as much as possible, we're going to do free tarot readings, just 3 carders. Really simple, really straightforward, takes a few minutes. I think we do them in about 5 or 10 minutes. And when you get a full reading, it takes about an hour and a half. So there's a lot of information that comes across. There you go. There's all my personal ads for the day. Last thing I want to say is go down and like the video and share this with people. I'd like to build my followership on here a little bit. So there we go. Leslie said she just placed her order, and now you'll have both versions. Yeah, Leslie had the old version, the black and white version. This new version, as I've mentioned, has I republished it in color. It was published by Morgan James originally, and they did it in black and white for expense. And then I got the rights, and I did this color version, which we've been reading from. And I'm finding, by the way, I'm still finding textual typo errors and stuff like that. Not so much words, but sentences running together and things like that that should be on a new line. So it's got some of that in it. One of these days I will re-upload the manuscript after I've made all those corrections. So thank you, Leslie. It's the same artwork that's in the black and white version. It's just the color paintings. And I've added more color illustrations in this version than were in the original. All right. Shall we get going on this? I'm going to push my computer back just a little bit for space. Now, we have made it all the way up to chapter 13. And there are 15 chapters in total in the book. Now, do you remember what this whole story is about? Tam was going to go to America. He is waylaid from that adventure by his great uncle, Argyle Whitebeard McDervish, in the Highlands of Scotland. His little grandniece has been stolen by the fairy folk, the Fae, the little people, the good people. And so he's called on Tam to help find her. And so everything that's gone on in this book up until then is all the stuff Tam is going through to get to this place where he's looking for the little girl. Now, remember the last adventure? They went and they had to capture the Elizabeth Jonas, the English vessel that had been a warship that had been molesting the Scottish coast. And they capture it, but Tam returns it to Elizabeth in exchange for a letter to her cousin Mary, Queen of the Scots. And now that that's all done, he and Tam set on their way down High Street. Tam stopped in at the apothecary and thanked the old porcupine for his help. Then he and McNutt set out for Aberfeldy and the mysterious old badger of Loch Tay. Now, he doesn't even know yet that this is the answer that he's looking for, but he's got to go find because he thinks this old badger would know something. So here we go. Chapter 13, The Hole in the Stone.
I bit my finger.
You bit your finger? Let's see it. Come here. How'd you bite your finger? Come up here.
I was doing it in my mouth
As if I'm cue.
and I bit my finger.
Okay, let me see it. Bring it up here.
No pain.
There you go. Go to bed. Stay upstairs. Close my door. Thank you. Good night. I love you. Love you too. Bye. Good night. Mom will be home soon. All right, folks. Now we can go. Let's see. Carefully. LOL. Yes, Jeannie. How do you bite your finger? Carefully. All right. Aberfeldy was a 2.5-day walk from Edinburgh. Tam and McNutt rowed a ferry across the Firth of Forth and walked straight north to the town of Perth, where they spent the night at the inn. The next morning they walked until they found the River Tay and followed it to Aberfeldy. The countryside was beautiful, and its freshness was a welcome change from the deck of a ship, politics, and battle. Tam could finally focus all his energy on finding wee Brindleman. After stopping at a public house for some food, the pair continued a few miles along the River Tay until it spilled into the long, narrow loch bearing the same name. They crossed the river and headed along the south shore. You had said that you don't understand the good people, Uncle, considered McNutt. What is it that's so mysterious about them? Tam thought for a moment. They are creatures of the Almighty's that do not seem to fit into this world, at least not in a way that we think they should. They are here, yet apart. Tam stopped and looked out over the waters of the loch. He stooped down and scooped up a palm full of dirt, then spread his fingers, letting it sift through and drop slowly to the ground. We want everything to be as solid as the ground on which we walk. We want to be able to touch it, see it, feel it. Then and only then will we believe in it. Or rather, how we tend to treat the Almighty himself, eh? Postulated McNutt, in more of a statement than a direct question. Aye, smiled Tam, rather like that. We always want proof, yet for the things that are truly important, there rarely ever is. Tam let the last of the dirt spill out of his hand, then brushed his palms together, dusting them clean. McNutt pondered for a moment, then continued, Do you fear the good people? I fear what I don't understand, answered Tam. Then to understand something, paused McNutt, eliminates fear? No, not always, replied Tam, but it does pull away the shroud of confusion. I was always taught that God is not the author of confusion, but of a sound mind. With the absence of confusion, clarity finds its path. With clarity comes boldness and the washing away of fear. They walked on in silence for a while. The waters of the loch lapped gently on the shore, and distant birds echoed in the greenwood around them. The place seemed to hum softly, and Tam was certain he could hear the faint lull of pipes on the breeze. McNutt thought he heard it too, but when they'd stopped to listen, there was nothing. Chills ran up the back of Tam's neck, but it wasn't from fear, for he felt only peace in his heart. His eyes began to water. McNutt had tears as well, but they said nothing. They walked on for a short distance, then, when a very strange, quite unexplainable thing happened. There was no sudden, startling fear, no wretched awareness of the mystical, only peace, without any explanation or introduction, without sound or rush of wind, without fanfare or incantation. There they were, walking along the shore of with the old badger of Loch Tay. The old mystic's face seemed to shine, not with a light of some form, but with a peacefulness that filled the woods around them. Then there it was again, the sound of the pipes and the breeze. And this time Tam could hear them clearly. They were soft and lilting, wafting with the undulation of the gentle gusting of the wind. They were both sad and sweet all at once. "Your little Brindlin has indeed been charmed away by the good people," said the gentle, brittle voice of the old badger, who walked between Tam and McNutt with his arms around them both. Here, by the way, here's an illustration of that. There is the old mystic badger of Loch Tay, the loch in the background, the mist rising, and Tam and McNutt walking along the way. "What must I do to find her and bring her home?" asked Tam, unsure of why tears were beginning to stream down his face. "You may not be able to," said the old one, "and if you try, you may not be able to return yourself." Tam thought on this for a moment, then asked again, pausing on each word, "What must I do?" The old badger stopped and turned away from Tam. He looked deeply into McNutt's eyes, then took the young squirrel's hand in his own, holding it gently, yet very firmly. He turned back toward Tam, never loosening his grip on McNutt's hand. "Look into the forest," he said to Tam. "Do you see that standing stone?" Tam looked away from the shore toward the edge of the woods, and sure, if there wasn't a thick, stout standing stone, worn and cracked with the fissures of time, covered in vines and all overgrown with moss. As he approached it, he noticed that it was only slightly taller than himself, with a large, smooth hole borne out of the center, about the size of a small wagon wheel. The exposed portion of the stone's surface revealed that it was dark bluish-black in color, and it was cool to the touch. McNutt started to walk toward Tam, curious about the standing stone, but the badger held his hand firm, with gentle resistance. McNutt didn't know why, but he kind of understood, and he remained where he was. "All that is around you is not, and all that is around you is," said the old badger to Tam. "Brindlin is here with us, yet she's not." "Forgive me, but you speak in riddles," said Tam softly, "and I do not understand." "Do not understand," replied the old badger. "Believe." "What must I do?" Tam pleaded. "Thrice through the heart, and the world will depart," chanted the old badger. "Pass yourself through the stone's center 3 times, all the while your thoughts only on your wee Brindlin." 3 times, Tam repeated under his breath as he slowly turned away and stepped closer to the stone. He threw a quick glance back over his shoulder at Horatio and the old badger before pushing away the vines obscuring the hole through the stone's center. He then stooped down and stepped through the opening to the other side of the stone. He walked back around to the front of the stone and stepped through again, all the while thinking of Brindlin and how frightened she must be. When he emerged on the other side, he turned and came round to the front once again, glancing at the two standing on the shore. He hesitated for a brief moment. The sound of the loch and the greenwood blended into the ethereal sound of the pipes that had now grown even more distinct, filling the air around him. By the way, here's another illustration I added in this chapter of Tam passing himself through the stone, which is called a manantole. There you can see there with the fairy lights, which we haven't actually read yet. That's coming in the next sentence, starting to shine through the hole in the stone. So that's Tam and the stone, and he's passing himself through the center. Tam stepped up and through the stone's hewn-out center for the third and final time. Pardon me. When he passed to the other side, the woods were suddenly filled with a light, low, nearly transparent mist that floated just below Tam's knees. He turned back around to the front of the stone. His squire and the old badger were gone. The sun was glinting off the loch, tinting everything a golden hue. The trees were lush with the bright colors of autumn. The sad, sweet pipes were now no longer merely a distant sound echoing over the waters of the loch, but they melted into the hum of the very essence of the world around him. Tam wasn't sure if they were really even there, or if the wind was playing tricks on his ears, but he felt as if he could touch the very music with the tips of his fingers and taste the notes on his tongue. He closed his eyes, turned his face skyward, and breathed in deep, filling his lungs, it seemed, as if for the first time. "Welcome, Tam! Welcome, Tam O'Hare! Welcome! Welcome!" came several small voices from behind him. He turned and saw a group of tiny people who looked like young children, yet smaller. The tiniest of them came no higher than Tam's waist, and they all gathered around him with genuine smiles. The wee folk took Tam by the hands and led him along a path through the woods away from the loch. All the while they asked him joyously if he would join them in their feasting and dancing. "I would love nothing better," Tam said with happiness flooding his heart. Up ahead, Tam could see a clearing in the wood with an enormous fire burning in the center. Hundreds of the good people were dancing in a ring around the fire, singing along to the tune of the pipes that were echoing in the wood. As Tam entered the clearing, the wee folk who had greeted him broke off and ran in all directions, some to the dance and others to sprawling, ornately carved oaken tables filled with every sort of delicious food and drink imaginable. Several of the dancers came to Tam and pulled him into the ring, where he joined hands and kicked up his feet, singing along with the rest of them, and he danced and danced and danced for what seemed like hours. Yet he never grew tired or weary. He went to the tables and ate and drank, singing songs, not caring how he knew the words. Then he danced some more, and he was filled with happiness, beyond happiness, really. For the first time in his life, he was filled with pure joy. The sky glowed with golden hues, and pink billowy clouds floated over the treetops. With a handful of grapes and a goblet of sweet wine, Tam walked down the path to the shore of the loch and sat on the hillside. There were wee folk lazing all around him, and the peaceful, sweet pipes wafted on the gentle breeze. Tam had never been happier or more filled with peace at any time in his life. He drank deeply from his goblet, draining it. Then, after setting it down in the grass beside him, he lay his head back and looked into the clouds, where he watched a white bird floating gracefully on the breeze. He blinked twice, sat up, and looked toward the lock, elbow on his bent knee. Then he saw her. Sitting on the ground before the old standing stone was little Brindolin. She had several of the wee folk around her, and she was playing a wooden flute for them as they sat quietly listening. Tam stood to his feet and moved toward the girl, drawn by the lulling peacefulness of the flute. The music was beautiful. "Ah, me," Tam said, with a soft smile. "If only your grandfather could hear you play such beautiful music." And in that instant, his wits came rushing back to him. The beauty and peace of this place had charmed him, and until this very moment, he had lost all sense of why he had come. He stepped closer to Brindolin and knelt down beside her. Reaching up, he gently took the flute from her hands. She smiled at him. "Why, hello, Cousin Tam," she said in a crisp little voice that sparkled like the sun on living water. "Hello, my sweet," said Tam, tears flooding in his eyes. "I've come to bring you home." This, by the way, is Tam and Brindolin in that moment. She'll look at that for a moment. All right. She looked around a bit confused. She says, "But I am home, cousin," she said cheerily. Tam took her by her hands and said gently, "No, my little bird, I mean home, to your family at Glenborough." Brindolin furrowed her brow a bit, and then a smile filled her little face. "Oh, Grandfather Whitebeard," she exclaimed. "I remember him. And Sister Abigail, and Mother." The little girl's entire essence seemed to smile at Tam, who could only but smile back with all his heart. I'm going to interrupt you. You can see my children have listened to my mandate very closely. What can I do for you, baby? Mom's going to be home shortly. Why don't you go up with brother and sister and lay down. Close my door. Thank you. It never fails. I think the 4-year-old has less of a grasp on mandate than the 2 older ones. She loves to be with Daddy. So the little girl's entire essence seemed to smile at Tam, who could only but smile back with all his heart. Then suddenly, and with some sense of urgency, she pulled her hands out of Tam's and stood to her feet. Turning to a nearby bush of yellow roses, she reached in, avoiding the thorns, and plucked a single blossom. She turned back to Tam and tenderly took his hand in hers, upturning his palm in his hand. In his hand, she placed the delicate yellow rose. "Give this to my sister, for I ken that you love her," the wee girl said brightly, "and tell all my family that I love them too, with all my heart." Tam looked at the rose in his hand, and a strange thing started to happen. He could see through his hand to the ground below. Then, looking at Brindolin, he could see the hazy lock through her as she began to dissolve and fade right before his very eyes. All around him, the wee folk were sweetly saying, "Goodbye, Tam O'Hare, goodbye. Do come again, Tam O'Hare, when you can stay and dance with us some more." Tam looked at Brindolin, who was almost a mist. "No, don't go. Come with me, lass," he cried. "I cannot, cousin. I belong here," she replied. "The wee rose will live so long as you ne'er let it touch the ground, cousin." Her voice echoed off till it was as thin as the evening mist. "Be happy, Cousin Tam. Be happy. Be happy." Then she was gone. Tam sat all alone on the shore of Loch Tay. The air was cool and crisp and blue, and the sun was rising over the eastern hills. He wondered if he'd been dreaming, but there was the yellow rose in the palm of his hand. He was still on his knees in front of the old standing stone. He looked, but McNutt and the old badger were not waiting where he had left them. They must have taken shelter for the night. Had it been all night? In his heart he felt that he had broken his word to Uncle Argyle, and it was going to break Abigail's heart. He had failed, and little Brindlin was still under the enchantments of the good people. She was gone from them, and there was nothing Tam nor anyone could do. He sat on the ground, with his back against the standing stone, and his face in his hands, and he wept. And high on the air, the pipes lilted softly, and never was piping so sad, and never was piping so sweet. That is the end of chapter 13. Chapter 14. We can discuss this in a bit if you'd like. Chapter 14, Out of the Mist. McNutt was sitting at the table eating another portion of bread pudding, talking to Argyle Whitebeard McDervish, when the door burst open and young Hamish rushed in, shouting at the top of his little lungs. "Grandfar! Grandfar!" he said, panting and out of breath. "Come quickly!" Then he spun around as fast as he had come and ran out the door. McNutt looked at Argyle with curiosity and jumped to his feet. Argyle rose slowly to his feet as well, but needed McNutt's help with his walking stick. "What is it, lad?" called Argyle after him, hobbling toward the doorway. Everyone in the glen, whether indoors or working out in the fields, heard Hamish shouting, and thinking some tragedy had befallen, came running. McNutt, helping Argyle, emerged from the small house. "What is it, Hamish?" called McNutt. Hamish stood a small distance away from the house. "Look," he said, pointing toward the stream that bordered the west end of the glen. A light mist had risen from the stream as the sun was sinking low in the sky. The base of the standing stones in the hawthorn grove on the bank of the stream that bordered Glenborough blended into the mist, giving the appearance as if they were floating eerily a few feet off the ground. A trick played on the eyes in the fading evening light. "Och, it's just the mist, lad," said Argyle, a bit perturbed. "No, I dinna mean the mist, grandfar," Hamish shouted back, pointing. "Look!" Out of the mist, an indistinct form was moving over the stream, crossing through the shadow of one of the taller standing stones. As it emerged from the grayness of the long, slanted light of early dusk, the form of a tall hare took shape. Will-o'-the-wisp twinkled in the soft bluish light, flickering around the shadowy figure as it descended from the shallow bank of the stream. McNutt stood silent until a small smile slowly broadened across his face as the shape defined itself into a familiar form. "Uncle Tam!" he yelled out at the top of his lungs, and it lit as fast as he could toward the figure emerging from the mist. Everyone followed closely on McNutt's heels to greet Tam as he came up out of the water and onto the near bank of the stream. Tam smiled weakly as the children surrounded him, pulling on his doublet, grabbing him by his hands. Tam looked across the small gathering of family, scanning each face briefly, until his eyes locked with McNutt's. Horatio saw in Tam's eyes a sadness he had never before seen, and he too fell silent with the others. Everyone reaching out in silence to touch Tam as he moved past them, making his way to Argyle Whitebeard McDervish. Finally standing before his old uncle, tears flowing down his face, Tam dropped to his knees and looked into the old hare's gray eyes and shook his head slowly from side to side. Argyle bent down and embraced him, cradling Tam's head against his shoulder. "I found her, Uncle," Tam said through his tears, "but I couldn't bring her home." The old hare held Tam tightly in his embrace, stroking his hair as if he was comforting a small child who'd scraped his knee on a sharp rock. And in the same way a loving father feels the pain of his injured child, Argyle himself began to weep. "I'm just o'erjoyed that ye hadna lost ye, both, my gentle, my Tamerlane," soothed Argyle. "The mysteries of this world are sometimes a confusing thing. We are all just passing through this realm, not always sure of what it will bring us, not ever quite coming up with all the answers to every question. You've been gone so long, Uncle Tam, that we thought you were lost to us as well," said McNutt, who had come up alongside Tam and placed a hand on his shoulder. "So long? I've only just come from Loch Tay," said Tam, a bit confused. "It's been but 3 days since we last saw each other." McNutt looked up at Argyle, who looked back and nodded. Argyle held Tam's chin in his hand, turning his face up to meet his eyes. "Tamerlane," said the old hare, "you've been gane for us for nearly 7 months now. We thought you lost forever, or worse, we thought you dead." 7 months? said Tam, his voice trailing off in less of a question than a statement of disbelief. "It's the fairy ways," said Argyle with finality. "I just thank the Almighty you're safe and home with us the now." Tam, still on his knees, stared off toward the distant hills with a hollow look in his eyes that told a tale of 7 lost months. He opened his mouth to speak, but there was absolutely nothing to say. He remained silent and was still as Abigail came forward and put her arms around him. Tam drew Abigail close all at once to be happy with her, yet sorry for her loss of wee Brindolin. At that moment he remembered the yellow rose, and drawing himself away from Abigail, sat back on his feet and opened his palm in front of her. The rose blossom shone with an almost iridescent yellow in the palm of Tam's hand, as its fragrance belied its age. "She wanted me to give you this blossom to remember her by," Tam said, a smile making its way across his tear-stained face. Abigail closed Tam's hand around the rose and lay her cheek atop Tam's head as she embraced him. "Welcome back, my Irish laddie," she whispered into his ear, tears filling her eyes. In the quiet moment, a small hand reached up and touched Tam on the arm. He turned to see young Malcolm McDervish looking into his eyes. The lad blinked several times as he opened and closed his mouth, clearing his throat and swallowing hard. Then, for the first time since his encounter with the fairy troop in the hawthorn grove nearly a year before, little Malcolm McDervish spoke. "Well, welcome home, Cousin Tam," Malcolm said with his delicate, halting voice, brittle with disuse. He closed his lips and his face filled with a soft, small smile as he squeezed Tam's arm to punctuate his words. Abigail drew in a breath, shocked and happy all at once to hear the young lad speak. Tam put his round arm around Malcolm and drew him in close. Malcolm embraced Tam, then nestling his chin into the crook of Tam's arms, he closed his eyes and smiled. And now, the final, very short chapter. Chapter 15. Yes, Leslie. Abby and Bryn are Abigail and Brindlin. I named the characters after them because I wrote this book for them back when they were 7, 8 years old. Final chapter: The Wedding. Golden sunshine filled the glen like fresh water in a big glass bowl. Spring birds crisscrossed the sky, and the entire clan McDervish of Glenborough was gathered by the standing stones alongside the stream. A white-robed badger stood before the clan with an open book in his hands, and Abigail, dressed all in saffron, fresh strands of blossoms tied into her hair, walked toward them. By the way, here's a picture of Abigail in this scene. There she is. Giggling children preceded her, spreading white flower petals along the ground in her path. The crowd of McDervishes parted before her, creating an aisle that led to the white-robed badger in front. To the right of the badger stood Tam, dressed in a beautiful white leather doublet. He smiled as Abigail approached. In his white bonnet was Brindlin's yellow rose. He extended his elbow, and Abigail took it. They turned and stood before the badger, and everyone fell silent. Tam drew his sword from his scabbard and turned to face Abigail. With palms up and open, he held out his sword and dropped to one knee. "I offer you my sword, and with it my heart, my honor and my fidelity forever," he said. "Take my sword, and in so doing take my heart. But if you refuse my heart, then take self-same sword and slay me now." Tam then bowed his head. And here is Tam from this scene. And by the way, I want you to know, this is an old traditional custom from Scotland. And we did the very same thing with that sword right there when Rainey and I were married on October 27th of 2007. Abigail reached out her hand and took the sword from Tam's upturned hands. It was heavier than she thought, and she used both hands to hold it in front of her. As was the custom, she paused momentarily in feigned contemplation. Then, looking to her grandfather, Argyle Whitebeard, who smiled and nodded, she lowered the blade and touched it to Tam's shoulder, saying, "I do accept your heart today, and with this sword I do pledge my honor, my heart, and my fidelity." And raising the blade again, she lowered it to his other shoulder and added, "Forever." Tam looked up and smiled. He stood and took his sword from Abigail, replacing it in his scabbard. After a short homily delivered by the white-robed badger and the ceremonial lighting of candles, the priest had Tam and Abigail join hands. He placed his hand atop theirs and said, "I now pronounce ye husband and wife." Then, to punctuate the ceremony, he smiled broadly and said, "You may kiss one another." Tam took Abigail by her shoulders, and the two looked deeply into the other's eyes. They leaned into each other, and by the way, when I was reading to the school kids, every time Tam and Abigail had this opportunity, and they leaned in toward each other, all the kids would go, "No, no." All the boys would, and all the girls would go, "Yes." They leaned into each other and kissed. As they did, McNutt put his arm around Argyle Whitebeard, and they both smiled and wept for joy. McNutt then leapt to his feet, and raising his arms in the air, bellowed out, "Yally-hoo!" And their adventures were all just beginning. Now the epilogue. And high in the hills above Glenborough, when the sun is setting and the first twinkling stars of night can be seen, It is said that on certain eves, the good people gather in the hawthorn grove to dance in the fairy light. And every now and again, it is said, there can be heard lilting on the wind a sad, sweet tune played on what sounds like a simple wooden flute. The end. That is The Rollicking Adventures of Tam O'Hare. And the book has a lot of personal meaning to me. As you can see, and I apologize for talking about it, there's sections I can't ever read without having it have emotional impact on me. I remember when I wrote the scene where Tam couldn't bring Brindleton home, and he sat on the loch, weeping into his hands, and the pipe music was playing, and I typed, and never was piping so sad, and never was piping so sweet. And I hit period, and I sat back from my computer, and I was weeping. I had wept through the writing of it, drip off my chin. And I remember at the time saying, oh my God, what did I write there? Why is it having this effect on me? So it always has that effect on me. Certain passages just get to me. And so I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed writing it and illustrating it. Just because we have time, and I want you to hear this, I'm going to read my acknowledgments, which people usually skip in a book, unless you're like me, you want to get them out there. But this is important stuff in the book. I said this section of the book has been in my mind for quite some time. And by the way, I updated the acknowledgments when I updated the book, because there were more people who added to this. I said this section of the book has been in my mind for quite some time, and in many ways has seemed the most daunting. Had I any common sense, I would have walked around with a voice recorder. There are so many people that I need to mention here that I apologize in advance if I have somehow overlooked you here on this page. The Rollicking Adventures of Tam O'Hare began as stories I told to my daughters at bedtime, and evolved into the book you see before you today. Tam has been here with me and through the good times and the hard times, despite having been shelved and nearly forgotten many times over the years for various reasons. Thank you to all my family and friends who encouraged and supported me all along the way. As I mentioned above, the list is daunting and is not in any specific order. From the earliest years, I need to thank my friends John and Christina Knights for your invaluable input, especially Handsome Johnny, as we called him. He was part of our regiment, for his knowledge of history, peerage, and heraldry. Bill Locken for your friendship, support, and master swordsmanship. I had my good friends who were master sword instructors came over, and we worked through all the sword fight scenes in this book, so they made sense when I wrote them. So we actually fought them over and over and over again to make them make sense. Dave Potter for your sword and nautical terminology and proper usage, as well as sword fighting choreography, and for being my dear friend. Dana Walter for your loving friendship and continual encouragement. Craig Johnson of Arms and Armor for your weapons instruction and keen, detailed information input on the weaponry of Tam's day. That's where I got most of my swords, was from them. Ian Punnett for your friendship and support and love of my kids. LG Mac McGregor for your continued support, encouragement, cowboyisms, and kicks in the butt. Dr. Kate Maurer for your love, support, and editing of the story in its earliest stages. Dr. David Penchansky for overview and input Dan Kajowski for helping make this happen through your continued friendship and support. Samuel Fleischman for being my first agent and instilling with me so much information about the publishing industry. Bill James for taking this project to where it is today, and his wife Nancy James for the earliest edits and support, and both of you for 40 years of loving friendship. Jim Fitzsimmons for all the encouragement, and I want you to hear these voices, these names. By the way, we went to a movie with my oldest daughters, took us all to see the Lion King remake last night. And always, whenever I take my kids to a movie, I tell them, you don't get up during the credits. You sit until the very end and the lights come up. I said, you are paying honor and respect to those people who made this film happen for you. And it would always grate me, years gone by, decades, when as soon as the movie's over and the credits roll, people stand up. And I want to say, sit the hell down. I want to see the credits. Is life so busy for you that you can't take 5 to 7 minutes to pay respect to the people who made this film enjoyable for you? So that's why I read these. Jim Fitzsimmons, I got Amanda Fonder. I love you with all my heart. What an encouragement you've been to me. You are my dearest friend. Kay Fonder, for your wise words, sage predictions, and sincere love and encouragement. Lindsay Weiler, for your love and support at the time I needed it. Michelle Trexler, for your love, encouragement, financial support, and friendship. Dr. Charles Ailing, for instilling in me a love of history. Carr Hagerman, John Baer, Dina and Chris Ebert, Chris Wells, Jeff Shilkin, all of you for your friendship and encouragement in ways you may never know. Annetta and Gunnard Olson, that's Rainey's grandparents, for your help and support. Herb Olson, for your investment in my dream. David Smith, that's my brother who died, who I told you about him. He was fought in Afghanistan, was captured, tortured. He's the one who died a few years ago. My brother and friend, for your love, words of wisdom, and constant encouragement. I miss you beyond words. My friend Sean McGrady in York, for your poetic words of encouragement, friendship, and hours of literary banter. Jane Scott, that's my mom, for all of your love and support and belief in me through the years. My sister Svetlana, for the same. Grandpa OJ and Aunt Andy. OJ was my Oscar J. Gould. He was my Jewish grandfather that I've talked about. I wish you were both here to see this. You both encouraged me to follow my creative bent, and despite having both passed before I ever started this book, I know you have been here with me throughout the entire process, of course. And Abby and Bryn, my sweet little girls who are now 24 years old at the time of this new edition. They're now 27, so this was 3 years ago. For your belief in me, your unbridled encouragement and support, and for doing the dishes when I was painting or writing. I love you both, my little girls. Rainey Olson, that's my wife. You've been my encouragement, support, and right arm, and soon will be my wife. I wrote that one way back, 15 years ago. You will soon be my wife. We've now been, and then I put in parentheses, we've now been married 9 years since the original release of this book in its earlier form. Thank you for being my life and for putting up with my foggy, created brooding, and on some days, my downright detached surliness. I love you very much. John Ward, you are my friend and my brother. As Arthur once said of Lancelot, proposition, if I could choose from every man who breathes on this earth, a man for my brother, a man for my son, and a man for my friend, it would all be you. While you were not here for Tam's inception, you have stood as a constant encouragement to me. You represent for me the incredible gift of honor and nobility, and I love you deeply. Rocky Stucci, A man could not seek and find a better friend. You are a true rock and brother, and your ever-present encouragement in my life has possessed that stalwart drive for the higher and nobler things. Thank you for your support, your love, and your friendship. I'm a better man for knowing you. Finally, I'm sure I've missed someone. Don't be offended. There are so many of you who have been present in my life, encouraging and supporting me every step of the way. You have given with no expectation of return. Thank you for being part of my life. And that's the acknowledgments in the book. And then there's a huge glossary of all these terms and all the, well, it's not huge, it's only 3 pages. So, one thing I want to read to you, I made mention of this. Let me see where my reading glasses took off. You pardon me for this. There they are, behind the computer. All right. Okay, let me read this. This is the letter from Transfiguration School in Maplewood, Minnesota. This is the teacher I told you about. Dear Scotty, my 4th grade class was blessed to have you come in to our classroom and read The Rollicking Adventures of Tam O'Hare this spring. The students enjoyed the story right from the start and enthusiastically looked forward to hearing more of it each week. Your story is filled with interesting characters, high adventure, and noble deeds. Mystical moments, romance, and tragedy are woven into the story, too. It takes place in the time of Queen Elizabeth and Mary, Queen of Scots, giving the reader the opportunity to learn about this important time in European history. The author's excellent vocabulary enlivens dialogue and enriches the description of each scene. I personally enjoyed the story a great deal. The author put a lot of his heart in this book. Perhaps that's why the interactions between the characters are so rich emotionally. I hope this book and other Tam O'Hare adventures are published soon. I know my students and many others, like them, will very much like these words. Sincerely, Greg Vivering, of the 4th grade teacher, Transfiguration School. And then I have a bunch of these letters. I read one of them to you last week that the kids wrote to me. And I won't read through those. They're all 4th grade level letters. Oh, it's like this one right here in the corner. It's like I just told you. Dear editor. I don't know why they addressed it to editor. He said, Mr. Roberts' book was great. He must have put his heart into it because he even cried while reading to us. Go figure. My favorite characters were the good people. I like the way they leave hawthorn twigs in children's place. From Casey. And Casey drew a picture of a couple of swords and Tam's castle. So I thought that was pretty neat. So there you go. That, folks, is The Rollicking Adventures of Tam O'Hare. And I've got a book that I haven't started writing. I started researching, called Elemental. And I pushed it aside because I was finishing the 10 Breaths of Ra. And now I've got, as you all know, I've got the book on the Book of Enoch to write for New Page Books and Red Wheel Wiser. But Elemental is a nonfiction book where I'm looking into the elementals, the fairy, the fae, the good people, and different incarnations of them. Not universal. It's not an encyclopedia of the fae. It's more digging into the Irish fairy, the Celtic wee folk, the Tuatha De Danann, or the Tua, as Barry Fitzgerald said. And into even Native American versions of them. That I've been working with my good friend Reuben Fasthorse, who is Lakota Sioux, a dear friend of my family's, that is working with me to do this. So there you go. Talk about these things more in the future. And by the way, didn't notice on the front cover, there's the yellow rose in Tam's hat, his bonnet. So there's the book, folks. If you would like to get this for your own, go to that link that I put up earlier. That is, I'm going to put it up once more. If you'd like to get the book for yourself, go to Amazon to this link, and you can get this book for your very own. And then that's it. Unless anybody has any questions, if you don't mind, I'll scroll through just a little bit. Oh, here's a question right here from Leslie. Scotty, this might be an odd question, but when you wrote your first book, how did you sit down and start writing it? Oh, I wrote a paragraph. And that paragraph, you know what that paragraph was? It wasn't the prologue with Malcolm McDermott. That came later. The first paragraph was the opening of chapter 1, where it says, oops, I'm in the prologue. It's where Tam is calling out for McNutt in the middle of the night, where it says, sunrise was still several hours away when Tam O'Hare's feet touched the cold slate floor of his bedchamber. Winter had passed and spring was well underway, yet streamlets of icy nighttime air still managed to eke in through the cracks and meander their way down the stone-floored halls of Harehead Castle. With paws shoved under armpits for warmth, Tam hugged himself and shivered as he tiptoed across the frigid floor looking for the place where he had dropped his clothes. This was no time of night for a hare to be up and about, but from the moment he'd laid head to his pillow, he'd done nothing but stare into the dark shadows that engulfed the great oaken beams crisscrossing his bedchamber ceiling. All night long his mind raced and imagined, anticipating the adventure that awaited him at the cracking of dawn. He hadn't slept a wink. That was the first thing I wrote. And so, Leslie, what I do when I write is I get a picture in my head, almost like a motion picture. And I look at that picture playing out in my mind, and I start writing it. I do the same thing when I draw or paint. I get a picture in my head, and I start writing, and I start drawing. So that's all I did with this, Leslie, when I started writing the book. I sat down. Now, that's the paragraph I sent to agents looking for a good agent to represent me. And I'm going to tell you this. The prologue came with Malcolm McDermott hiding in the bushes and the two evil knights that he was hiding from, and then he ends up killing them and slashing them to bits, and they end up being, he's a little boy playing with his wooden sword with wooden knights that he made out of sticks. And then that whole scene with the fairy folk. I wrote a good, probably about a quarter of that. I was sitting in church, of all places, and I was with my ex-wife, who had been away from the family for 6 months, and she would come to church with us. And I sat there during the sermon because the pastor was incredibly boring and irrelevant, and I wrote the first quarter of that prologue right there on the announcements sheet for the church, and I wrote all around the margins and everything, and then I went home and transposed them into my computer. So I wrote that during church instead of listening to the boring, mundane, droning, irrelevant pastor. So that's how I started. And then I just get a picture in my head. Sometimes I have to make notes, not often. But the same thing with the 10 Breaths of Ra. The same, I would just create the story as I go. And non-fictional books you have to present when you propose it to the publisher. You've got to present a quantifiable, detailed table of contents to show them where you're going, so they know you know what you're talking about. So that's when I do that. Hey, Melinda. Let me go back through. VJB, how you doing? Let's see. James Sheets, good to see you, brother. And I'm going backwards. Topper, good to have you. What do you do for focus on coming up with new ideas? Topper, I got to tell you, very honestly, I have no problem with new ideas. What I have problem with is time implementing new ideas. I've got a dozen active ideas going on in my head right now. Um, for instance, when my agent started presenting 10 Breaths of Ra around, she wanted me to write up where I saw the series of books going. I said, I've only got one in my head so far. Oh, wait, nope, I've got 12. And I just started mapping out different story ideas that I'd like to see these two characters engaging. And so that's how it starts for me. Ideas are a dime a dozen. It's implementing. If I had the time to not have to worry about supporting my family, I'd be spending all that time writing and illustrating. It's like you get the one good thing over the hump, or a couple of them it takes, and you're there. Then that's what you do for a living. This is still on the side for me because this doesn't really produce my living. Tam O'Hare hasn't made me a dime. Other than I sold off a few of the original pieces of artwork when I was doing very poorly a few years ago. And I just sold a few of them off. And my other books do all right. My books with New Page Books, but they don't make a living. You know, I can say, you all know who Nick Redfern is. Nick told us all at one point. He says, he's a prolific writer. Does a lot of stuff for New Page Books and now Red Wheel Wiser. And you know what? He says, this is about 8 years ago. He says, I've taken about $4,000 or $5,000 a year off my books. He's got like 50 books out there. And so I still get royalties off of the Nephilim and haven't made a single bit of royalty off of the Exodus reality yet. It's a different kind of book. So if I had time, I'd be doing a lot. I'd be doing a lot of ideas. Melinda, your dog is intensely staring at the wall. I wonder what's there. Let's see. Let me go way back and see if there's anything. Audrey had to leave. Sorry. See you later, Audrey. I know you'll be over in the Situation Room later. Sorry you had to go. Let's see. Thank you for everybody who liked this. Yes, I answered the question to Leslie that Bryn was the inspiration for Brindolin. Bryn and Abby were Brindolin and Abigail. Let's see. Anything else? Just some comments through the book. So as we get toward the end of the comments, I hope I hit everybody and said hello to everybody. I'm glad you're here. I appreciate it. Thank you. Anything else? Leslie, Gina, I have a whole list of celebrities I refuse to go see in a movie or buy their music. Yeah, there's still a lot of good ones that keep their political opinions to themselves. I don't care what anybody's political agenda is or their political point of view, but if you start pushing it on me, if you're not a political pundit, it's like, let's take Rush Limbaugh. You can't hate him because he's being political. That's what he does. It's his living. It has been for a long time. So I agree with you there. Let's see. Go to the Amazon link. Yes, please. Let's see. Leslie, you say it's so hard to get started. This is going to sound flippant, and it's not meant to sound flippant at all. It is as factual a statement as I can make on this. You know how you write a book? You sit down and write it. There is no other way around it. And I used to say, and I still say, having a book written is easy. Writing the book is daunting. So the process of writing, you put your heart and soul on the page if you're writing fiction. And that's why I liked Hemingway. It's sad ended up committing suicide, but you could see his emotion in the things he wrote, the things that drove him. So you just sit down and do. All right. Let's see. Topper, I hit your question. I'm going back toward the end now. Melinda, I don't know if I said hi to you or not, but hello. Thanks for being here. Mary Wins, it's good to see you. I didn't see you till just now. Thanks for being here. Let's see. And that's it. So there you go, folks. Now I'm just dragging it out. Suze, by the way, good to see you. If you want to listen back to any of this, if you miss it, this will be archived. It doesn't pop up right away, but within the hour, I think this will be visible on YouTube publicly, and you'll be able to click in if you need to listen. But if you came up with a book relating to U.S. history, Rush would sell it for you on his radio show. Maybe, Topper. Getting endorsements from those big guys can be very expensive. He would have to really love the book. U.S. history, yeah. I've got a few of those in the back burner too, on history. Revolutionary War period is my favorite period in American history, and so if I was to write, I would probably write in that era. I actually had started something on that for kids a long time ago. It was before Tam O'Hare. It was about a mouse, a colonial mouse. A colonial mouse in the House of Burgesses. And it was a mouse that took you through the American Revolution. And I also wrote, and by the way, this old graphic novel I showed you a few weeks, last week sometime, this I published myself in 1988. It's a comic book graphic novel. The premise of this was the American Revolution retold as a space opera, science fiction. As a matter of fact, one of the characters, I got to show him to you. Let's see, where is he? I patterned him after Thomas Jefferson. And it's not a perfect match for these characters. Here he is. You see him? Yes, here he is. There's my, believe it or not, science fiction, science space opera. There's my Thomas Jefferson character right there. And that's where he shows up in this book. And I've got a couple other shots of him in here, I think. Right here. Yeah. That's my Thomas Jefferson character right there. So there you go. Enough of that. Okay. So let's start to call it quits. Please tell JJ night-night. Hello, Captain. If you see me, I see you, Susie Q. JJ, good night. I hope you enjoyed the story. Good to see you there. And Mouse on the Mayflower. Yep, I remember that one. By the way. Yes, I have worked in acrylics, Melinda. I did a painting of my daughter and her husband for their wedding that my other daughter had me paint. I happen to have this sitting behind me. This is really old, by the way. I'm going to tell you right up. I painted this in 1984, and it was in storage, and it's sitting behind my chair here. But this was acrylic. This is something I did, 1984. So it was just a fighter pilot. So there you go. Done in a very comic booky style. But there he is. So that sits back here. Because I haven't hung it up anywhere yet. So yeah, I do some. 1984, that's old. I was 24 years old when I painted that. I'm now 58. So that gives you an idea. So there you go, 88. And that's the same year I published the graphic novel. Okay, since I'm just blethering away, not really talking about anything in particular, I want to thank you all for being here. Join me in 40 minutes for Rocky Stucci's Situation Room. We'll be live in 40 minutes over on Rocky's channel. And Paint Rocky and call him the Mona meatball. There you go, Topper. I have to see what I can do. Time. It's all time. Yes, please. Thank you, Michelle. Michelle, did I say hi to you earlier? Yep. Go ahead and hit the like button. I appreciate it. And share my page with people. Help me get a goal. Just to get up over 1,000 people would be nice. I'm at 679 or 680. It goes up and down. So if you like what you hear, share it. Share it. So thank you lots. 2. Love you lots. Thanks for coming in here. Thanks for being here. I appreciate it more than you can know. Good night.